I just wanted to start with what you're doing right now because I've been wanting to ask you what you're actually doing in London. I looked it up and it was like Series C startup.
Yeah, so I work in a payments company called Taya. It's a merchant acquirer, first and foremost. So the business is we onboard our merchants into kind of our ecosystem. They use our terminals to go pay. That connects to card schemes. If you think about what that is, it's just a basic payments company, right? The interesting strategy is kind of the whole platform that's around it that our tech teams are trying to build, which I think is super exciting. They're trying to basically become an all-in-one finance platform for small businesses, which I think is the target market. It'll be very interesting to see how that's executed. I think there's a large addressable market for it. It is going to be a big financial boon if it's successful. I think Europe in general is a very fragmented kind of market. So being able to serve pan-European, I think would be really cool. And that's the aim. So start in the UK, win the UK, and then move into other markets. Not to say that we are not in other markets currently, but I think the test case is the UK and how successful we can be. And you can't really, countries are different and rules are different, particularly for something that's finance that deals with people making payments and the exchange of money. So you have to tailor your approach to how you enter markets. And there are certain rules and certain kind of schemes or nuances to each market that need to happen. So that's what the company's trying to kind of navigate right now. As far as what I'm doing personally, I am on the finance side of that in FP&A, working directly with the engineering and software development side of the house. So a lot of what I do is really just making sure that we're spending our money properly, right? We're efficiently allocating capital. It's not that I'm making that decision, but I am creating information that allows leaders to make those decisions, to understand whether they are overinvested in certain areas or underinvested in others, and whether there's opportunity for them to kind of accelerate things or if they need to kind of slow down, depending on data from sort of a finance side, but then also operationally what they're seeing. So it's been very interesting to kind of see this from a smaller scale, coming from Walmart, where I came from, where everything is big and massive and very daunting when you see the zeros attached to the things you're kind of to decide on, versus here, where even though it is a very well-funded startup, you are mindful of the fact that you don't have the wiggle room that a Walmart would have, right? I can't just go and say the rounding error is $1 million. No, it is probably 1,000 euros at the most. So the scale is very different in that sense. It's a mindset shift, right? And it tests my ability to be a lot more frugal. So definitely very, very different and quite a challenge to shift that mindset. In addition to that, I think one of the benefits of working for a company like Walmart was it's old, processes are in place, structure is in place. You kind of have a little bit of a playbook of how things get done. At a startup like this, where they're trying to move too fast, you're really trying to pull them back sometimes, right? There aren't really mechanisms to do that because in a company like this, they want to chase kind of what the market's doing. They want to be able to deliver faster because if they don't deliver fast enough, some other guy might deliver faster than them. And then whatever they're working on becomes obsolete. And then we are all scrambling to find the next thing. You've seen this at startups before. So that to me is a challenge. How do I enable my partners, the engineering teams, to still do what they need to do, but also then be mindful of the fact that we do have a finite amount of money. You can't just go and hire 30 engineers and buy new software for $4 million and do all that, which you can do at Walmart, right? You can kind of just go say, we're going to shift strategy. We're going to talk to vendor X. We're going to go buy this new software. Here, it has to be calculated and kind of more deliberated over, even though there are no processes to do that, or at least the processes are limited. So it's been interesting to try to build those processes, and the company itself is, I think, trying to bring in more people that are from backgrounds that have seen kind of process and have built process. So they're into this curve of maturity that they now realize that we're big enough to do a lot of things really quickly. That also means that we need to now have people that will allow us to frame those choices better, because if we just start doing things, we may burn cash or go into places we don't really want to be.
Yeah, I hear you. How did you come across that opportunity in London? I mean, you were working for Walmart, and I know you were looking for different opportunities, but I didn't know you were looking into like different continent or different country. So I was just curious how you landed on that opportunity, how was the recruiting process, etc.
It was very interesting. Yes, you were right. I wasn't really looking for London specifically, and leaving the US wasn't really a big, although as we talked before, I did always plan on leaving the US at some point, but I didn't know that it was going to be this year. As far as this opportunity, I left my job at Walmart June of last year. Actually, today, exactly a year ago, June 21st was when I left Walmart. Yeah. So I really only wanted to take a little bit of a break, right? Basically, from June to maybe October, September, I really wasn't looking for a job. I dealt with a bunch of other things from a health standpoint, kind of family standpoint, wanted to kind of soak in the fact that I had more time to myself. And then as I started kind of getting into, okay, it might be time for me to jump into the market. My background is in supporting technology teams from a finance capacity, at least post MBA. So I wanted to continue that. And Seattle is a fantastic place to do that, right? There's a lot of tech companies from Amazon, Microsoft, Zillow, and then if you wanted to pivot into kind of more traditional businesses, Starbucks or Costco is there. So there was a lot of opportunity for big corporations. So that was kind of where I was. But then I also wanted to look at, are there any startups in the area, right? And so I've had those conversations with people that we know from Duke, and also people that I got connected with. And as I started to have those conversations, one of the roles that popped up was a role at Microsoft working for a Duke grad. So this Duke grad was recruiting, and I wanted to get in touch with him. And so I sent a message to one of our classmates from Duke and said, hey, you work with this person, can you make an intro? And so that was the process that started to happen around October. About maybe a week later, I got a text from our friend, and he goes, hey, I have a buddy in London that might be looking for a finance person to help out with the tech org in his company. And that was really how this conversation started. I wasn't thinking about London at all. I wasn't thinking about moving, wasn't thinking about payments, right? I was just thinking in general tech. And so I had this conversation, and it just kind of snowballed from there, right? I had a first conversation with the CFO. It went well. He kind of put me through as, here's talk to the head of FP&A, who is now my boss, and then a couple more conversations. A conversation with the CTO. It kind of snowballed from there. It's just a bunch of conversations, and it kind of just not really lucked into it, but I did kind of seek out a network, and this was one that I wasn't looking for, but eventually kind of landed into. And I got the call in January that I got the job, and I wasn't really sure I was going to do it until I pulled the trigger, basically, until I was basically, I'm going to go. And to me, the decision making for that was hard, right? I had roots in America. I bought a house 4 years ago. I have kind of a life there and routine and all that. But then I also thought about, right, there are very few times in my life I kind of get to make this call, right? And I was like, well, now I have the choice in front of me, and I get to make a call. And I was like, you know what? I am not married. I am young. I don't really have, beyond the fact that I own a house in the US, there isn't really anything that's kind of tethering me here. My family's all over the world. So to me, there was never going to be a better time to kind of do this. Now it's a different life stage. I probably would not have done it. But I thought that given where everything was at, it made sense for me to try. Interesting company, different kind of industry from what I was doing before, faster paced in some senses. So I thought that was it.
It all makes sense. And also, it was interesting how it all started with Duke Network.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? A lot of people go do an MBA. There's always this joke about recovering consultants go and just kind of take a break and then go back to Deloitte or McKinsey or wherever. Or, people that just want to do like banking, or banking is a big one because they just want to funnel into investment banking and then figure out what else is after that. The kind of traditional MBA jobs, the more marketed ones, right? Or you go into corporate like I did. Those are kind of the normal paths you take. And within that, going back to the networking, you meet a lot of people, right? And for us, a class of 440, 450 people was great because it was a manageable enough amount that you get to know a lot of people. I think for you and I, there is probably, a really good portion of our class that we can go and pick up the phone right now, call them, and they'd probably answer and have a time for a 15-minute chat, right? That I think is a big value of it. I'm not saying that the education wasn't great, but I think the larger value of it longer term is just the people you meet and who you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, or even just hang out with. Like last week, a classmate of ours from Fuco was here.
Really?
He lives in Zurich. Yeah, he lives in Zurich, and he flew over here for work. We had drinks. It's great to catch up with him, see what's going on, what he's doing in the space he's working on. So Anibal, right? Anibal lives in Zurich. And he used to work.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, he was at Deloitte. He moved over to the new startup. It's great to catch up with him and see how he's doing from a career standpoint, but also just from a personal standpoint, right? So again, it's just people you meet. They're all interesting and trying to do interesting things. Your network kind of grows as the people you know move around, and you can leverage that. I think that's really a big thing. That's a perk of it.
Yeah, back to the comparison part. Other than the budget that they have, like Walmart and Teia right now, did you find any difference between how people work and communicate in the US and the UK?
It's not a comment on the people themselves, but I think culturally, the people here start work later. It is a thing I found. Because the first time I went into the office, I went in at like 8 and no one was there. Right? At least this company anyway. I don't know if this is the only place I've worked in the UK. So I go in at 8 and there's maybe one other person. So they start work a little later. They end later, obviously. It's just that they start their days. They reclaim their mornings more, which is good. 30. So a lot of people push closer to that 9:30 kind of mark versus in the US we're kind of used to 8 o'clock, right? Or 8:30. Culturally, they do take their breaks from a lunch standpoint. They don't eat at their desk like we're used to in the US. So one guy actually came over to me one day and he was like, we're going to have to beat the American out of you because I was eating lunch at my desk alone while everybody else was in the kitchen. And I was trying to finish something and it was very funny. One of those things. From a actual comparison of work, there is more, because of the fact that this is a startup, it moves faster. There is some kind of controlled chaos thing going on, and because it's smaller, you feel the urgency more. There are not as many layers, so when someone from the C-suite goes and say, I want X, you feel it because they're just going to walk over me, so it's a little more of that. And because we're getting to the point where we're trying to standardize a lot of things, particularly in my job at FP&A, a lot of kind of insights and reporting that we do is still in the process of being standardized. So a lot of times we'd send out data or kind of analysis in a deck or a document, and it comes back and they want something completely different. So it's not like a Walmart where this is how the information is framed, give your analysis, and then we move forward. Here it's like there's still more kind of building to do. So this becomes a lot more kind of, okay, we don't like how this is framed or that. And there's a lot more of that going on as the company grows and as things get standardized than a Walmart. So that's one piece. The second piece is, because it is a startup, you wear so many more hats. Like I have had to lean into working with more of the people side of the people team, kind of what they do, kind of learning, understanding what they do. There are things that I've been asked to drive that normally I wouldn't drive. So there's part of my role that I didn't realize I had to do, or at least was on my radar in the beginning, that now I have to drive. So it's been a little bit more of that.
I think it's just a startup life, right? All hands on deck kind of situation. You have to do multiple things, and also, but at the same time, I feel like your experience at Walmart will be valuable for them because you come from the structure, come from organized way of working. So you can have a lot of opinions about how they can set the structure up, maybe.
For sure. Part of, I think, the reason I'm here is because they value someone who's kind of seen a little bit of what better looks like. So there's a piece of it that is just them needing a steadier hand, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a thing that they've been trying to do. There's a lot more hires on my level and above that come from kind of established companies. And so what better structure looks like, or what a structure would look like, right? For certain places that don't have structure, right? So there's a lot more definition involved. So, and the teams within Teia have realized that that's a thing that's happening. They're also more receptive to a bunch of this because as the company grows bigger, they need some more semblance of control. There is a lot more scrutiny from a company like this because it deals with money, it deals with payments. So there's a lot more regulatory things that are involved. So there are things here that are more robustly documented. There is just more. You have to tick the right boxes in the sense that because it is heavily regulated kind of industry.
If you were to compare Teia to maybe like a company in the US, what would be comparable here?
Are you talking about culture? Or are you talking about
like
business?
In terms of what they do?
So if you think about it, the basic product of Teia is merchant acquiring. So if you think about will be a good one. A visible one would be like Square. You attach your phone and you swipe. For us, there is an actual kind of physical kind of terminal, an actual payment terminal that you see everywhere when you pay. So we have those that run on our software. Onboard merchants onto our platform, and they see the statistics, which most merchants are the exchange of information between issuers and banks, and then back to us and the merchant. That is the real strategy of it, or not the strategy. That is really the market we aim for. That's kind of the market we serve, and there are a lot of them. Even in the US, they say that all the time.
Small businesses, fried chickens, soju places, whatever. So I think
it really kind of shows your priorities about what you buy. Soju places and fried chicken.
Back to maybe your life in the United States, maybe for the people who might be listening later. Could you high level describe what you did at Walmart and some of the projects that you worked on that were interesting, maybe like the M&A deals?
So post MBA, started at Walmart. I was in their finance leadership program. It's rotation, so 6 months, 3 teams. My first job at Walmart was to handle CapEx for the US, which was very interesting because I got to see kind of how stores are getting revamped, what kind of technologies they're trying to put in the stores. But then also there's boring stuff, right? We want to change the lights in the store. So there's also that, right? We want to repaint the store. So that was my main focus at Walmart in the beginning of my first 6 months. It kind of gave me a view into how to manage CapEx, which is something I do at Taya now. And then moving on to corporate development, which I think is a super cool role, but it is very different. It's kind of its own thing, particularly because you function as the place where Walmart is going to do inorganic growth. So the future, forward-looking things, particularly in the technology space. So I remember looking into things like drones or telehealth or self-driving car, a lot of really interesting things, but obviously a lot of them also don't pan out. It's a lot of just begin to this, see what's out there, then come back and tell me what's happening. There's obviously kind of looking at the international businesses from the standpoint of, okay, what really do we want to look at? So reevaluating where they were from a portfolio of company standpoint, and Walmart chose or made choices around which markets they want to stay in and which markets they don't want to stay in. And that decision making is very interesting. So that was really cool. And then I shifted to merchandising as my third rotation, which was very data heavy. I had to do a lot of data crunching, had to flex muscles I never knew from a technical standpoint that I had, or had to learn things that I didn't know before. So I thought that was a very good experience from a hard skill standpoint. I had to learn how to do certain things with software that I've never used before to gain insights and provide reporting and information to teams that need them. So I thought that was super insightful. And it was very central, so I got to see how the business and departments of Walmart were performing relative to what was expected, which was the closest I got to the retail side of the business. After that, I moved into technology finance, which is kind of where I sat for 2.5 years before I left. My remit in the beginning was to look at a very large portion of Walmart's cost, which is kind of software. A company like Walmart runs on so much software. If you just imagine the 2 million people that work at Walmart have to have access to email, have to have access to a lot of things that they need to do the job. That was part of what I needed to understand, was that tech portfolio and how to optimize that, and whether it is even optimizable. So I thought that was great, working with procurement people to understand how they buy things or what they think about when they're buying things, right? Why would you ever decide to do like a 3-year versus a 5-year versus a 1-year? What is the consideration set there? Or even just thinking about, why would you place the cap on a number of seats and of licenses at X versus Y? And how do you extract tiered pricing? Like, there are things that for procurement that I thought was very interesting.
Walmart's such a big company that if you are willing to explore different opportunities even within the company, I think there are just a million things you can do. And I feel like the leadership development program is a good way to get your experience in different areas.
To have the ability to see different sides of the business and find out, A, what my gaps are from a learning standpoint, and B, what I like doing, right? And what I want to learn more about. I had offers from other companies, but ultimately chose Walmart because it's a giant company that is undergoing transition, and I wanted to see what that was like. And 2, it offered me a better path to kind of the end of the program. There were programs that were, 2 years long or 3 years long. And so before you get out of it, you're kind of already 3 years out of MBA. So your progression becomes a little slower. Not that I was chasing progression, but I did want to find a seat, a permanent seat after a year and a half, right? Or a year. was Walmart gave you an option to graduate early. So that was my thought process in going into second year recruiting, and ultimately how I kind of decided on what I wanted to pursue afterwards.
Yeah, I think leadership development programs are very good opportunity. It just fascinates me the way you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do. I understand that you do have to network within the company too. I think you mentioned that multiple times, but at the same time, just companies in the US, they're just huge and there are so many things to do. So I think I can definitely leverage on that. And also my impression on industry recruiting is that you have previous experience that aligns with what they are looking for. Would you say that's pretty accurate? Because if you're recruiting for consulting or banking, they don't really care about your past experiences. It's just more about casing and networking and how you excel that. But it feels like if you're looking for a job in corporate finance or corporate strategy or marketing, you do have to have that past experience, right?
I think it's an advantage, right? An accountant going into a finance job isn't a real stretch, right? And that's what I was. I don't think that it precludes you from trying your hand at a corporate job. We know people that have done it, that they were in a completely different industry before, and then they're now in a new industry that they excel at now, right? Teachers go into corporate jobs. Or a great example of this is, our friends from the military, right? It is not a requirement, but I think it is an advantage. It made it easier for me to talk about what I can bring or what my experience has been relative to what a finance job would be. And it made it easier for me to study for cases.
Yeah, I see. Also, is casing a common thing for corporate finance recruiting?
So I did one for Walmart. There are different types of casing. Walmart had a case. There was one where I had to do a presentation to a panel, and then another one that had a couple cases. So it is pretty common, particularly I think because they now want to judge you on how you perform under pressure. It's time bound. There's a question you need to answer, and they want to see how you think. And that's really what casing is. And obviously, it's different casing for a McKinsey or a Bain or BCG or a Deloitte or wherever consulting firm X that you want to put in there versus a corporate job. Because I think in corporate, it's a lot more about, do you understand how working with us will look like, versus can you technically get to what the right answer is? They just kind of want to test your skill level.
I feel like from your explanation, it's somewhere in the middle between like the banking, recruiting, technical interview, and like strategy consulting, like casing. It's like somewhere in between. You have to know but at the same time, you do have to make a decision between different options.
The airline was like, can you tell me EBITDA is calculated and what it means? So a lot more that seems a lot more like an investment bank question where it's like a real specific technical question versus not a real versus Walmart, where it's two investments, A or B, or a telecom company asking you to present for a panel about some initiative they're trying to do. So are you able to at least understand how that works? So there's that.
I'm learning a lot about the industry. Well, I guess I was under the same type of interviews, but I feel like I'm learning a lot.
So I'm going to flip the question. Your interviews for healthcare, were they very healthcare focused or were they more behavioral? Obviously, I interviewed for different industries, but for kind of very similar roles, mainly behavioral. Even the final round was kind of behavioral.
For the first round, it was mostly behavioral. So they went through my resume pretty thoroughly. And they picked one bullet from my resume and kind of like threw me a mini case. What would you do in this case or in this situation? What would be your thought process? How would you make a decision? That type of mini case. So they did that. But I think in healthcare, generally, it's more about behavioral. I don't know why though. I think it's the nature of healthcare, very people-oriented.
Makes sense, right? I remember mine being just mostly behavioral. Obviously not coming from any sort of healthcare background beyond having doctors in my family, right? It was very interesting to actually see that side of it and kind of what they're thinking about. But yeah, going back to some interviews, obviously, there are kind of heavier ones. Super Days, right? Banking is very, very big. You do kind of get those. A big one, like interview loops. Like for Amazon was a big one. You do like 4 hours of interviews in one day. So for finance, we got a case, like a technical thing where you had to answer certain questions. They sent you a set of data, and you had to clean it up and do things to it, and then answer the questions that they were providing you. And then a set of behavioral questions. So it depends on the company as well. That was a lot more intense because they were a lot more interested in going deep in questions. A lot of behavioral interviews kind of go and tell me about X, and then they kind of move on to the next, tell me about Y. But the Amazon interviews were like, let's talk about X, and then why you did that, and then what happened, and then why you thought that way. So it's a lot more where they dig deeper into what you're telling them. So you can't just have a polished 2-minute answer, right? Which is kind of part of what we learn, but then there's like, tell me more about why you thought that way. Tell me more about why that happened. And I think that's also something that people now need to be at least mindful of. There has to be depth to the answers, because sometimes you will get a probing question, particularly for companies that have defined cultural tenets that they want to test for. Amazon has those leadership principles that they really, really, really like, and they really, really live, and then they're actually part of how you work. So they do test for that. And so they'll ask you a question that kind of starts that, and then probe deeper into how you kind of owned something and tried to act on it and move it forward. So
yeah. Also, Walmart does sponsor, right?
Walmart does not sponsor, at least. Okay, so Walmart sponsors for tech roles. It is not sponsored for corporate roles. So if you want to go into finance at Walmart, at least when I was there, they do not sponsor. If you want to go into an operations role at Walmart, they do not sponsor. But if you were going for a PM role, even a technical PM role, you can go do it. Or if you want to work in the PMO of a tech org, you can do that at Walmart. They will sponsor you. I always feel really disappointed when somebody reaches out to me and I talk to them and they're really cool and they ask me the sponsorship question, and I have to tell them, if you're applying for a corporate role, unfortunately, it's not available to you. So by the time I got to like year 3 at Walmart or something, whenever somebody reaches out to me, the first thing I tell them is, I'm happy to chat, but know that Walmart's not going to sponsor if you're trying to do a corporate role. I've been more upfront because I know that people's time is valuable, and I don't want them to think that if they are needing sponsorship, that talking to me will lead to anything beyond that. I'm happy to obviously give advice and talk about my experience, but beyond that, of kind of pushing an application or moving them forward into something else wouldn't really be available to an international student, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're just being mindful.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Great success.